Hello, and welcome back to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Today's episode is going to be what I'm going to dub the ugly ducklings of the handgun world, the polymer hammer-fired handguns. Before we get into the bio and into the episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review of the podcast. If you want to check it out on GoodShepherdTraining.com. There's some more visual stuff, some pictures from past adventures and all the things I've been blessed to do. If you want to check that out, if you want to support the podcast, you want to buy some merchandise, anything like that, GoodShepherdTraining.com. Again, that's GoodShepherdTraining.com. And if you want to skip the bio, you can skip around 3 minutes and 45 seconds from where it starts. First and foremost, I am a servant of God, preacher, a fisher of men. God is number one in my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different, and I don't apologize for that. A little bit about me in the background. I grew up, I guess what you would consider a heathen. Didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider very poor. Hunting and fishing and shooting. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in law enforcement for several years in LAPD. I worked patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, where by God's grace, He got me through some nasty places in this world of war zones and some of the nastiest streets in the country. Not because I am better, because God chose to have mercy on me and had a purpose for me, and I'm thankful for that. After my time in law enforcement, I was a private contractor for federal government, for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify, doing private contracting work. I'm very much involved in guns and gunfighting. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I should say my primary MOS is in both branches of the military or infantry, as of one sort or another. Specialized infantry in the Marine Corps and an MOS that no longer exists. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed by God with the talents He's given me to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. I've won most of my competitions in rifle and pistol, but I've also competed in archery and shotgun and even muzzleloader, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've competed in all that. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting. I've done it to put meat on the table because I like to put food on the table with the talents God's given me. I don't apologize for that. I've done it as a professional hunter and guide. I've slain all manner of beast and guided for all manner of beast. Bear and wolf and elk and deer, mule deer, whitetail deer. I've slain ram and fallow deer and countless animals. And I don't apologize for that either. FBI certified, firearms instructor, NRA, and a bunch of other 3-letter government agency certifications. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team, an SRT, special response team, in a large metropolitan area, where our primary job was to stop active shooters. But again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, called by God to share the good news, preacher, a fisher of men. With that, we will roll into the day's topic. Alright, man. With that, let's get into the day's episode. The ugly ducklings of the handgun world. Now, in the last, since the 80s, let's say, polymer striker-fired handguns have been kind of the thing. The thing for law enforcement. Now, the thing for the U.S. military, polymer striker-fired handguns. And kind of when you think of the classic handguns, the 1911 metal hammer-fired guns, the Walther P38, all kinds of things like that. You're talking about, the Beretta 92. These are iconic, handguns, and they are metal hammer-fired guns. But what about the in-betweens? What about the polymer hammer-fired guns? Where do they fit in? Well, I think to get into this topic, we should explore kind of the why behind these two marryings. Why polymer? Why polymer framed guns? Why, and Glock wasn't the first one, but why did Glock really take the market by storm, and why has plastic or polymer really become kind of the de facto handgun frame? And there's a few reasons. One, it's lightweight, which who doesn't appreciate that? If you're a soldier, if you're a cop, of which I've been both, Marine, of which I've been that also, private contractor, and you heard the bio. If you're carrying something all the time, you appreciate lightweight. The big advantage, and to me the biggest advantage, is polymer flexes a little bit, where metal generally will just snap. And polymer generally gives a little bit, which can greatly help in reduction of recoil. So you get a lightweight gun with reduced recoil, and that's awesome. I appreciate that. I'm not a Luddite. I generally do carry metal guns, probably more than polymer guns, but I appreciate the qualities of that, and I appreciate that. In fact, some of my favorite go-to guns, the STI 2011s, have that. They have kind of a metal frame mixed with a poly frame, which we'll get into, but they give that quality. There's a reason competition shooters run them so often, is because of that lightweight and because of that giving in recoil. Those are two big advantages, and let's not overlook the advantage of cost. Polymer handguns are cheaper to produce in general than metal handguns are. And I know you can get some really expensive polymer guns, and I know you can get some really dirt cheap metal guns, but in general, it's cheaper to manufacture and produce, and mass produce. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, let's not turn our back on technology. If it's better, it's better. So those are some of the advantages of polymer. So that's kind of why we got the polymer framed handgun. So why then the hammer fire? What's the advantage of hammer fire? Well, hammer fire, in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinion, gives you the best trigger pull. Hammer fired, a good single action hammer fired 1911, even a mediocre 1911, is kind of the standard for the best trigger pull in a handgun. And there's a reason for that. It really is good. It really is crisp. The polymer striker fired guns, no matter how good you make them, tend to have a little bit of grit, a little bit of mush, a little bit of feeling like dragging a piano down a dirt road with your finger before the gun goes off. A good metal on metal, metal sear on metal hammer fired gun can have, they don't always, but they tend to have very good, clean take-up, crisp, clean break, like a glass rod breaking on your finger. Just a beautiful, beautiful, crisp break without a lot of over-travel. A lot of people that have gotten into the shooting community in the last couple of years always talk about this shoot to reset, and they don't realize that kind of became a thing because Glock triggers were so bad that you kind of had to, that they had all this extra movement and take up and slack and grit and grime, that you kind of had to shoot to reset to be efficient. If you have a really good trigger, you don't really have to worry about that, because there really isn't much of any of that to have to worry about or to deal with. So, why not mate the polymer frame with the hammer-fired system? And a lot of people have, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And what got me sparked thinking about this was I was in a gun store, and I saw a SIG 2022, often referred to as the SIG Pro. And it's a fantastic gun that never really caught on. And I think because a lot of people, especially the American market, if it's too different, they kind of shy away from it. And this was very much like a SIG P226-229, which has been a standard law enforcement military handgun for quite a while. Again, since probably the 80s. and it's a metal frame gun with a hammer. Well, they came out with a SIG Pro, and by all accounts, it's a robust, durable, great gun. And it has a fantastic trigger pull. The ones that I've messed with had a great trigger pull. And they pretty much have a polymer frame that looks very, very similar. In fact, from a glance, you would think it was a 229 or a 226, but it's a polymer frame gun with a hammer. And it's a double single, but it's got a good double single trigger pull. And it's a fantastic gun. Again, I think it just never really caught on because the people who want that classic hammer-fired gun a lot of times want the classic metal frame. But there's nothing wrong with a plastic frame hammer-fired gun. That SIG Pro is kind of an underappreciated gun. And I wasn't even planning on talking about this, but if you don't know, if you haven't been around a super long time, the SIG 320 is kind of a dominator on the polymer striker-fired handgun market today, but that's kind of a direct delineation from the SIG P250, which was their polymer hammer-fired gun that never really caught on. It kind of flopped. I've only ever seen maybe one of them, maybe a couple, but I don't even know that they make them anymore. But SIG came out with that and thought it was going to be like a game changer, and kind of nobody wanted it. So they kind of evolved that into the 320, which eventually became a good, successful handgun. But again, that was a delineation of a polymer hammer-fired gun, and there was nothing wrong with it. Again, I think people just didn't realize it, the potential of it. Another one I'm going to talk about is the CZ series, P07 and P09. Now, if you know much about handguns, you'll know about the CZ75 and all its delineations, the shadow, all the different variations and copies of that. It's probably one of the most copied handgun designs. For good reason, it's a good one. But CZ themselves make a polymer frame version. It's the P07 and the P09. And I'm not a big fan of this gun because it's a striker-fired gun that manages to have a not great trigger, at least the factory ones and some of the ones that I've played with. Now, I did play with a used one the other day that had a fantastic trigger. And I don't know if that's because the person just shot it a lot and it broke in really well, like in Smith & Wesson M&P tends to do, or if they had some work done to it and polished it and it turned out to be a fantastic trigger. But that tells me that the potential is there. But out of the box, it kind of has a trigger that's on par with a Glock. So that really kind of negates the advantage of a polymer, hammer-fired gun. So why would you do that? So CZ, I think, had the potential to make a really good gun, but the trigger pull on it, in my opinion, is probably on par with a striker-fired gun, but it's very subpar for a hammer-fired gun. But again, if they have the potential to have a really good trigger pull, it's probably could be a really good gun. Probably the most successful commercial military law enforcement adoption one we're going to talk about today is the HK-USP. This has been around a long time. They still make it. It's kind of been forgotten because there's so many plastic pistols coming out, but it's a fantastic gun. The HK-USPs are great guns. They come in many different guises, from 9mm to 40 to 45. They probably made some in 357 SIG when that caliber was a little more popular, but they are fantastic guns. The HK-USP are great. That was one of my first competition guns, was an HK-USP Expert 45. But any of the HK-USPs are great. They, for some reason, tend to handle recoil of powerful cartridges very well, and I don't know why that is, but I just, from experience, kind of know that, and in my opinion, they do that well. But the HK-USPs are fantastic guns. They have a great trigger, and they have something kind of unique in... They're not the only guns that do this, but they're one of the most prolific that do this. They give you the option to carry it double single, like your classic Beretta 92 or your normal SIG 226s, 229s. They also let you have the ability to carry with the hammer back and safety on, like a 1911 or a good single action only gun. A good, what is considered the best trigger pull, and you can carry it like that. And you can pick and choose how you want to carry it. You could also carry it, I believe, with the hammer back, and then if you decide you want to, you can just decock it by pushing the lever all the way down. And in my opinion, that's probably one of the best designs that's ever come out. I don't know why everybody didn't adopt that, other than a lot of agencies mandate double action only or double single. But that's a freaking fantastic design, and a lot of versatility, and a fantastic gun. So they did do that. The HK also came out with a slightly newer version, I believe, called the P30, which is a hammer-fired design, which is also great. But the USP is really prolific and a great gun. Don't think that they're outdated and snuff your nose at them. The one thing that is kind of antiquated on the USP is the fact that it has a proprietary rail. So that means that, and it's not HA's fault. It's not like everybody else came out with a standard rail and they came out with this rail. This rail kind of came out before there was a standard 1913 Picatinny rail that we all know today. So it has a proprietary mounting system. That being said, it's been around a long time, and it's probably not hard to find adapters or lights that mount on there. But again, I wouldn't turn my nose up at a good deal on a USP. They're fantastic guns, and they are made very well. They are very durable. Another great gun, we talked about copies of the CZ. Well, the Jericho pistol, if you don't know, and it's got a freaking cool name. Jericho is just a cool name for a pistol. The Jericho is made by IWI, Israeli Weapon Industries, the same ones that make the Tavor and a lot of other good military guns. They also make the Jericho, and it's, to be fair to CZ, it's pretty much a copy of the CZ75, but it's still a good gun. In fact, I was playing with one that came in the store the other day, and I was really impressed with what a good gun it is. And it is a hammer. At least the newer ones. I think the older ones were metal framed, but the newer ones are plastic, polymer framed, hammer fired guns. And I had to say, picking it up and messing with it, it seemed like a really good gun. It had a really good trigger pull. It had a really good single action trigger pull. If IWI makes it, it's probably a good gun. Everybody makes lemons, even Glocks from time to time, and has issues. But I haven't heard anything bad about the IWI Jericho. And it seemed like a very good gun. It seemed like a perfectly serviceable and in the running for a good polymer gun. And again, that single action trigger pull is going to be superior to most of your polymer striker fired triggers. And it seemed like a very good gun and worth mentioning, the IWI Jericho. Again, it's one of those guns that in a flooded plastic market, it's kind of been forgotten. Now, Springfield also came out with, I believe, the XDE, which is very similar to their XD series. Actually, I guess it is technically their XD series, but instead of being a striker-fired gun, it's a hammer-fired gun. I'm not going to talk much about those because I am not a fan of Springfield handguns. I honestly don't know how they stay in business, but a lot of people like them, so I will throw that in there and mention that. And move on to one of my favorite polymer guns, and that is the STI 2011 series. They have changed to Staccato. A lot of people still know them as STI. I don't actually own any Staccatos. Mine are older STIs. They're fantastic guns. They were my go-to duty gun for a long time, before they were the cool duty gun, before most people ran them. The STIs are fantastic guns, and what you could call them a steel frame or metal frame, I guess. Unlike most that are a true polymer frame, these kind of mate half and half. So the grip is basically polymer, and the whole frame that locks into the rails is all steel, which is one of the things, in my opinion, that makes them as accurate as they are and as fantastic as they are. They have a great design. So you can change the grip out, you can shape the grip, and a lot of other things. So they were kind of modular before the 320 actually came out. Not as modular, but they're pretty modular. And they, again, have that polymer benefit of they're not super heavy. You can get a double stack 9mm that holds, 21 rounds, 26 rounds of 9mm, which is more than most handguns. And you can get it in a 40-something ounce package, which is about the same as a 8-round 1911 that's full steel. So you get that lightweight. And in my opinion, they're some of the softest shooting, fastest handling handguns ever designed. They're just fantastic, and they have that superb, beautiful single action trigger and those great 1911 ergonomics. They are fantastic. They're just a great gun. I love them. I've carried them on duty. I've shot them quite a bit. I've competed with them. They're a great gun, and the fact that they're still around and the fact they've been so popular among the top shooters for so long, it will show you that they're reliable, they're great, and they have a lot of those attributes we talked about in the beginning. That's my personal favorite of those, but there's a lot of good polymer hammer-fired guns. There's probably a lot that I didn't mention. I kind of walked around the gun store that I manage and saw a couple, and also, just from memory, but there's probably a lot out there. I didn't even Google it. There's probably quite a few that I failed to mention. So if you have a favorite I didn't mention, go ahead and leave a review of the podcast and leave it in there so everybody can see it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review of the podcast. With that, I want to say, if you like this podcast, if you think the content was worth $1, the fraction of the cost of a box of ammo, and the fraction of the cost of one round of some calibers, consider going to Patreon and supporting. These are free for you to listen to, but they're not free to produce. There's websites and there's hosting, so you guys can actually have access to the episodes. I'm not a technology guy. When I got into this, I kind of had to learn all that stuff, but it's not free. So if you want this content to continue to be produced and you like it being put out, I hope that you will continue to support. Tactical tip of the day is a lot of the polymer frame handguns we talked about have a space in the back, especially Glocks. Now, they're not hammer fired, but this is a tactical tip. It applies to everything. If there's a space in the grip, they a lot of times will make aftermarket grip plugs. And yes, Glocks do break. Lots of guns break. But there's generally some free space in there. And what you can do, and one of the things that I have done in the past when I carry a gun like that and like to do, is throw an extra spring or two back there. Glock trigger springs break, so throw an extra spring back there in that grip part. You might want to put a part of an earplug or something up near the top so they don't go actually up further than they're supposed to, but throw a half an earplug in there and then throw an extra trigger spring. And then most people that own Glocks or polymer guns upgrade the sights. So take that factory front sight, and also it will fit back there, and throw that up there. You know, it's not uncommon to drop a handgun and break the front sight off, and then what do you got? You know, you don't have much. Maybe a CQB weapon. But, you know, throwing that extra factory front sight instead of just throwing it in a drawer somewhere and forgetting about it, throw it in the back of the grip. That way, if you drop your handgun and break it, you have a front sight you can just replace on there. And that's a tactical tip of the day. Again, if you thought that was worth $1, consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com and supporting on Patreon. That brings us to the tactical verse of the day. The tactical verse of the day is going to come to us from the story of David and Goliath, 1 Samuel 17. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David took them off him. David had access to the coolest tactical equipment of the day, the king's, sword and armor. And he said, no, I will not go into battle with these, for I have not tested them. Now, David had the wisdom from God to know that you don't go into a battle, you don't go into a gunfight with something untested. It's better to have what you have that you've trained with and tested than the coolest tactical kit, the most cutting edge, literally best thing that you haven't tested or trained with. David had told Saul, I've killed lions and bear. He had tested his equipment, and he went into battle against Goliath with what he knew, with what he tested, with what he trained with. There's a lesson for that for us as gunfighters. So be wise. Use the wisdom that God gave you. Don't trust your life to something unproven. It brings me to a story of a man that came to the gun store the other day, and he had an STI. And it's a very good gun and very reliable. And he said, I got these duty loads. You think they'll work? And I said, have you tested them? And he's like, no, but they should be fine. And I was like, no, you should test them. I know they're expensive, but, funerals are really expensive. Testing your duty load is not that expensive. So I went out there with him, and we tested his duty load, and it was fine. And I said, well, at least now you know. You don't just assume that it's good. You know that it's good. Don't just assume your stuff's going to work. Test it. Know it. Thanks, man. Have a blessed day.